you're running away. That's what you're doing. The probability that you're leading is vanishingly small. The probability that you're deluding yourself about being a leader when you drop out is exceedingly high. So the right assumption is if you drop out, you're useless and lazy, as well as arrogant and resentful. And you should start with that presumption and then go through, cataclysmic soul searching to see if maybe it might not be true. It's true. Well, what's the probability? Saint or loser? Well, there's so few saints that you just using baseline predictions, actuarial tables, you have to assume loser. So, and if you're a loser who thinks they're a saint, well, then you're going to cause an awful lot of trouble. So, and a lot of that happened in the 60s. So, the 60s generation likes to think about themselves as admirable rebels. It's like, yeah, let's check a bit for some self-serving tendencies there. Like the refusal to adopt responsibility. And that's always lurking underneath like a revolutionary facade. So, and I think that's had an absolutely pernicious influence on the universities, especially the humanities, which are dropping in enrollment, cataclysmically deteriorating in influence, and based far more on, the what would you call it? The idea that you have a moral imperative to be a radical activist. It's like, no, you have a moral imperative to be useful and honest. That's a whole different thing. If you want to change things, fair enough. But don't be thinking that change isn't dangerous and that you're right. It's highly unlikely. So anyways, my point is, there's an archetypal way of representing the Great Father, and the archetypal way is tyrant or benevolent dictator. It's something like that, and you don't get to just say one of them. Now, here's a way of thinking about it historically. You could say that once, these are archetypal and religious representations, so you could say, well, roughly that's God the Father, and God the Father you see there is ruling over a walled city. And the walled city is the Father as well, because it's an enclosed space that's keeping chaos out. And there's a hierarchy in there, a dominance hierarchy, and everybody's slotted in the hierarchy. And you could think of the dominance hierarchy and the value hierarchy as the thing that manifests itself as the Father, symbolically speaking. So, and that you're protected by the fact of the hierarchy, even though it also oppresses the hell out of you. Maybe you're like a serf, but maybe it's better to be a serf than to be someone alone in the middle of a battlefield, That's certainly possible. You can make a case for that anyways. So then you look at that and you think, well, is that tyranny or security? And the answer is, well, it's both. And what's the balance? And what you hope is, well, let's have a little more security than tyranny. And then what's your moral duty? Well, to ensure that the Great Father, who you are not bloody well going to get rid of, and you better not, because you'll end up like the Mesopotamians when they slew Apsu. You remember what happened to them, right? Apsu was Tiamat's consort. He was the masculine element, chaos and order. As soon as the ancient gods were formed, they made a lot of racket, and they were really careless, and they killed Apsu, and then they lived on his corpse. Well, that's not a very good idea, because then Tiamat comes, swarming back, and the probability that she's going to do you in with all her monsters, unless you really pay attention and speak properly, is very, very high. The Mesopotamians had that figured out. Well, they had it figured out in image. It's an absolutely remarkable story. So, yes.
Imagine times where it wouldn't provide much security and it wouldn't provide much tyranny, or it would provide a lot of both. Do you think these are kind of orthogonal or relatively correlated?
Okay, there's two questions in there. One of the ones was sometimes it would provide a lot of both. Well, I think that's what happens when you're subjected to extraordinarily high standards. Is that order or chaos? Well, it's both. because there's massive benefits in high standards. The problem is they provoke anxiety and they're very hard to attain. Does that make them bad? There's no saying. It makes them bad and good. And it's even more complex than that, because whether they're bad or good depends on how you react to their imposition. If you discipline yourself and straighten yourself up and learn a tremendous amount and achieve the high standards, that's way better for you than if the high standards weren't there. But they're also going to crush people. They're going to crush people for all sorts of reasons. They're going to be really hard on people who just aren't that fast, even if they work really hard. Or they're going to be really hard on people who are quite fast but really don't work very hard. They're going to be hard on people who, have impediments to their progress in one unfair way or another. So the tyrannical element is exactly there. So, I think the whole bloody thing degenerates into tyranny when the people inside it are doing nothing but lying. That's the pathway to tyranny. And I would also say that that's the hallmark of the adversarial personality. We've talked about the great mother, creation and destruction, and the great father, tyranny and security, but on top of that is the individual, and there's the part of the individual that's heroic, and I would say that's exploratory, attentive, and capable and willing to articulate the truth insofar as that can be conceptualized, and then his polar opposite, which is, the opposite of that, willfully blind and deceitful at every possible opportunity. And there's certainly an interaction between all three of those levels. And I think that's part of the reason. One of the things that happened in Christianity was that the serpent that was in the garden got associated with Satan. That's a very weird thing, It's very unlikely when that story first emerged that the serpent had any association with the idea of the adversary at all. But as the story developed through time, what happened was, if you construe the serpent as chaos itself, and maybe the negative element of chaos, it was easy to associate that with the tyrannical father, so there'd be a satanical element to that, and the adversary himself, right? Because it's all negative, so that's the connection between the three levels. And it took Western culture, roughly speaking, thousands of years to delineate that idea. It probably didn't come to its full poetic flowering until Milton, and it's very little of it is in the Bible as it currently stands. Virtually nothing.
Doesn't Satan literally translate into the adversary?
That's one translation. Lucifer is also the bringer of light, though. Weirdly enough. So it's one of these paradoxical situations, because it's also not always the case that your adversary is the devil, so to speak. It might be an angel in disguise, and that's Jung's notion with regards to the shadow. You might think that it's evil, but it might be the thing you actually need. Now, lurking underneath that is the idea that there is absolute good and absolute evil, and I think you can make a case for that. In fact, I think the 20th century made a case for that, and I think that's what was decided at the Nuremberg trials after World War II, because the judicial decision was, there are some things you don't get to do, no matter what your culture is like, and no matter what your excuse is. And the alternative to that was deciding, well, we can let you off the hook because you were following orders. And people really debated that, and you can say, well, the Nuremberg judges were the Allied victors, and so they just imposed their own viewpoint, but I think that's pretty damn cynical. There's probably some of that, because things are tyrannical and benevolent at the same time, but, accepting that judgment is a very peculiar metaphysical move. But rejecting it, that's also a very peculiar metaphysical move. Because basically what you say if you reject the Nuremberg decision is that what happened in the Nazi concentration camps had to be judged through the lens of cultural relativism. So you can say that if you want, but it's not one of those things that you should do lightly, because, well, you run into Dostoevsky's problem. Dostoevsky's problem fundamentally is if there's no order, hierarchical order, if there's no God, then everything is permitted. And you can walk down that road, but it doesn't lead to a very good place. Okay, so So, what we're trying to sort out is the idea, we're trying to propose the idea that what myths are doing is trying to represent the fundamental elements of being as being is experienced at every level of being. So it's not a reduction to chemical or physical constituent elements. It's a perception of the world as it manifests itself at every level of existence simultaneously. And it's predicated on the proposition that there's no reason to make any one of those levels primary from an ontological perspective. So what that would mean in part is that the web of relationships that you find yourself in is just as real as the physiological components of your cells. Now, obviously, in some sense, it can't be measured or even conceptualized in the same way. But that doesn't mean that the relationship isn't real. So it's a much more comprehensive way of looking at things. And it tends to take on this dramatic and imagistic form, I think, because, well, first of all, it was acted out before it was understood, and second, images can capture all sorts of things that words cannot yet express, which is why we like looking at profound artistic images. They're filling us with information. And what I found out recently, that Heidegger, whose ideas actually have a fair number of similarities with what I've been teaching you, except I'll tell you something interesting that I think is true. So Heidegger tended to view modern civilization, he tended to view it as the tyrannical element of the Great Father, stopping us from being able to interact with pure being. So he was very his proposition was that we reconnect ourselves with the positive element of being and produce a culture, a social culture that was much more benevolent. But I think, if you think about this from a Jungian perspective, what the Jungians claim, and this is Alfred Adler claimed the same thing, and so did Nietzsche to some degree, is if you tilt too far in one direction, a counterposition develops in your imagination and starts to have an uncanny influence on you. So I can give you an example. So I've had clients, for example, who are way too agreeable. So maybe they're pushed around by their father for decades. And, one of the ways they react to the hyper-aggression of their father, or the dominance of their father, or maybe their own weakness, is that they classify dominance and aggression as evil and then refuse to engage in it. Of course, that just weakens them further. But then they harbor resentment, And so one of the things Jung suggests is that if you get gripped by an emotion, you need to let it manifest itself in a fantasy.
xa xôi, không màng về tình ái muôn nơi. Sống trọn là trọn kiếp đây thôi, đâu quan tâm gì chuyện đời. Thế mà lại ngâm tương tư, ông tầm bà mũi xe tơ. Đêm nằm trộm nhớ mơ mơ về ai. Thì ra anh yêu rồi, từ ánh mắt nụ cười, từ đôi môi gọi mưa sao xuyến lòng anh. Thì ra mê em rồi, ngày hay đêm ôm lời, chỉ nghĩ đến em thôi. Đó là do anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi. Anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu em mất rồi. Anh hay mơ mộng mình thứ xa xôi, không màng về tình ái muôn nơi. Sống trọn là trọn kiếp đây thôi, đâu quan tâm gì chuyện đời. Thế mà lại nằm tương tư, ông tầm bà mũi xe tơ. Đêm nằm trộm nhớ mơ mơ về ai.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
Silhouettes of you are like a taunt. Never really know just what you want. With you I don't ever feel calm. I can feel the sweat inside my palms. Play with me like cats and a string. You don't understand the pain it brings. You don't ever wanna give me wings. You don't ever wanna set me free. You know I'm addicted to you, and it's twisted, you've been gifted with the evil voodoo. Got me coming back for more, even when I've been screwed. Dolls full of pins, pierce my heart straight through. I got issues in my head, I like you in my bed, but you keep me on red. Oh, everything is like a test, I better not text or I'll come off desperate.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
So if I play dead, will you regret everything that you did? that you said. I don't think you understand what you're doing, and my heart's black and blue from the bruising. I feel like when I'm with you I'm losing. I feel like you think that this amusing, sitting there gaslighting and confusing. Was it me? Is it me? Am I deluded? I'm the one who's always sorry, the conclusion. Even though I offer all of the solutions, I wish you loved me like I love you, it's stupid. When I'm alone with you I never feel lucid. I wish I wasn't struck by Cupid. I wish when I first saw you I knew this. When I'm with you I feel so useless, I feel diluted, my heart's been wounded. Silhouettes of you are like a taunt, never really know just what you want. With you I don't ever feel calm, I can feel the sweat inside my palm. Play with me like cats and a string,